From Maine Public Radio and mainepublic.org, I'm Robbie Feinberg with the news on This Day in Maine, Friday, December 10th, 2021.
This Day in Maine is made possible by the Maine law firm of Eaton Peabody, serving generations of Maine families and businesses from offices in Augusta, Bangor, Brunswick, Ellsworth, and Portland. And by Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, helping members stay healthy and happy with comprehensive coverage, smart digital health tools, and engaging well-being programs.
The Maine CDC is reporting 2,148 new coronavirus cases today, a new record high. That surpasses the previous single-day record set yesterday of 1,460. Today's report brings the 7-day case average to 963. That's by far the highest since the pandemic began. 8 more Mainers have died from the disease, and hospitalizations continue to surge in the state. That's prompted Governor Janet Mills to bring in help from the Maine National Guard and the federal government. 375 people are hospitalized with the disease, 122 are in critical care, and 60 are on ventilators. The Maine Emergency Management Agency is working with the state CDC to determine where the 75 National Guard reserves will be assigned to address the COVID burden at Maine hospitals. Under an order from Governor Janet Mills, National Guard members will assist with vaccines and providing monoclonal antibodies for compromised residents. Dr. James Jarvis of Northern Light Health says they'll also help care for patients at long-term care facilities so patients can be discharged sooner and free up beds.
Our hospitals have many patients who are really able to be leaving the hospital to go to a long-term care or a skilled facility, and those beds aren't available. And so they remain in the hospital, taking up crucial hospital beds. And so that helps to decompress the hospitals so the hospitals can then accept more acute care patients.
Northern Light Health will be opening new vaccination sites in Portland and Bangor early next week and encourages anyone age 16 and older to get their vaccines or boosters scheduled using its online registration portal. The Old Town Paper Mill is asking local residents to drop off pizza boxes and cardboard as it deals with a surge in demand for materials. For about a month, mill owner ND Paper has asked for corrugated cardboard, food packaging, pizza boxes, and other materials from residents of 4 surrounding communities: Old Town, Orono, Milford, and Bradley. The company uses the donations to create recycled paper pulp, which is then sent out to other manufacturers to create cardboard products. The idea, says spokesperson Brennan Burks, is to ensure that the donated boxes don't end up in landfills, and to also help the company offset the growing costs of cardboard materials, which he says are in high demand with the rise of online shopping during the pandemic.
The desire and demand for recycled product and cardboard product and packaging products has skyrocketed and is only anticipated to keep growing over the next several years.
The program is currently only open to residents of the 4 surrounding towns, but the company hopes to eventually expand. Residents can drop off cardboard in a bin close to the mill at Portland Street in Old Town. A conservation group has formally petitioned the federal government to require lobster fisheries to convert to ropeless fishing gear within the next 5 years. CAI's Eve Zuckoff reports it's the latest effort to protect critically endangered right whales from entanglement.
At the moment, ropeless fishing gear is being tested by only a small group of lobstermen. Many have concerns about safety and cost and are skeptical of a new technology that has yet to be proven on a large scale. Kristen Munsell with the Center for Biological Diversity, which filed the petition, says a 5-year timeline will force regulators to invest in and solve the problems with ropeless fishing gear.
The petition notes that while costs and other factors have hampered the widespread adoption of the gear, a legal requirement to use it will help further technological developments and investments that bring down the cost.
Munsell says developing the gear is the only viable solution to save whales and allow for the fishery to continue to operate. For the New England News Collaborative, I'm Eve Zuckoff.
And in the weather tonight, snow and rain should end across the state and mostly cloudy. Lows from about 19 to 32 north to south. Tomorrow, warm but with more precipitation, rain and fog in the south with a wintry mix inland that'll change over to rain by midday. Highs in the 40s to mid-50s north to south. And it's now time for Maine's Political Pulse, our weekly roundup and analysis of politics and government.
Welcome to Maine's Political Pulse. I'm Erwin Gratz with Maine Public State House Bureau Chief and Chief Political Correspondent Steve Missler and political reporter Kevin Miller. Maine hasn't escaped the pandemic, but for most of the last 2 years, it avoided the overwhelmed hospitals and even rationing of care that happened in other parts of the United States as the coronavirus pulsed through the country. But the state's luck is running out, as its healthcare system is now being challenged by the highest number of COVID cases the state has yet seen. Steve Missler, what are we hearing from Maine hospitals?
Erwin, healthcare officials around the state have been sounding the alarm for a while now, but this week we're starting to hear some startling details. Emergency rooms are being converted into ICU units because the designated ICU units are crammed with COVID patients. Some patients are being treated in the hallways, according to a doctor at Maine Medical Center. In some cases, the only way a bed opens up for a patient is if someone else dies. Cases are rising everywhere, and hospitalizations have put the entire healthcare system at what Governor Janet Mills described as a tipping point during a news conference this week, in which she also announced that she's calling up the National Guard to alleviate some of the pressure on the hospitals. This surge, according to health officials, state officials, and the hospitals, is being driven by unvaccinated patients. Here's a snapshot from just one hospital system, Northern Light. On Wednesday, 83 of the 105 hospitalized patients were unvaccinated. 33 of the 38 ICU patients were unvaccinated, and 10 of the 11 patients on ventilators were also unvaccinated. And that's why Governor Mills once again urged Mainers to get their shots.
There's still too many people who haven't even got their first shot, and it's not fair to the rest of the population who've gotten fully vaccinated, who've done their part, and who don't want to be deprived of the ability to get a hip replacement or some other surgery or healthcare access. It's not fair to them. It's not fair to anybody.
But Maine is one of the country's most vaccinated states, with some 69% of the population having been fully vaxxed, which means the vast majority of hospitalized patients are coming from the minority of unvaccinated individuals. So what is the governor proposing should be done about that?
Well, the governor says this is an all-hands-on-deck situation, and that teamwork is the only way out of this. The problem, of course, is that not all hands are pulling in the same direction, Erwin, when it comes to vaccines. This has been the case all across the country. The case for vaccination should be compelling. According to the U.S. CDC, unvaccinated adults' risk of hospitalization is 9 times higher than a vaccinated adult. The risk of death for unvaccinated adults is 14 times higher. Yet those numbers have not convinced the unvaccinated to get their shots. Health experts say access to vaccine is definitely an issue in some cases, but the largest barrier is hesitancy, and that's been fueled by misinformation.
Well, at least on the financial front, Maine state government seems to be doing well. In fact, Kevin, the revenue forecasters seem to be having trouble keeping up with the good news.
Yes, we seem to be doing quite well, at least in terms of the amount of tax dollars that are flowing to Augusta. The folks who analyze these and track these trends for the state are projecting that the state will take in more than $820 million more than had been projected for the next 2-year budget that starts in July. They caution that there's a lot of uncertainty about those numbers because it's hard to predict the economy during a pandemic, and there have been instances in the past where we've seen some volatility. But with the prospect of more than $800 million in additional revenue coming into the state, that begs the question of what should be done with that money. There seems to be bipartisan support for offering some sort of direct relief to Mainers. The question is, it's not clear what form that would take, whether that would be checks that are sent to Mainers, such as the $285 checks that are going out to more than 500,000 people that worked during the pandemic, or if that would be income taxes. Republicans have signaled that they're willing to work with the Mills administration. The governor has said that she's willing to do it as well. But since we're talking politics here, looking ahead, we have a big election year coming up next year. And as Republicans have already tried to frame the election involving Governor Mills around this question of her handling of the pandemic and the state's economy. And so we'll have to see how those discussions and those debates shape up when the legislature comes back in next month.
Well, moving along, we've mostly discussed Central Maine Power's transmission corridor project here as a local story. The Maine utility wins a lucrative Massachusetts contract to usher Canadian hydropower through the state. There's pushback from citizens who vote to block the project. But in a time when renewable energy is considered necessary to combat climate change, Steve, who else is interested in the fate of the New England Clean Energy Connect project?
Well, the Biden administration appears to be very interested, Erwin. So just a few days before the November election on Question 1, which asked voters whether they wanted to halt construction of the project, U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm did something pretty unusual, I think, for a presidential cabinet member. She urged Maine voters to vote no on Question 1, saying that it was a vital project to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that's why fossil fuel interests had campaigned against it. Flash forward to this week in this report in the Boston Globe, which centered on 2 setbacks to Massachusetts' climate initiatives, of which the corridor is one. Granholm was quoted in that piece as lamenting the Question 1 result, but also that her agency is looking for ways to see the project to completion. She didn't really elaborate or say how or anything like that, but there was a reference to an obscure provision in the recently signed infrastructure law that gives the federal government a little more power to override local decisions on transmission projects if they're designated as projects in the national interest. Now, there's some dispute over how much power, but the fact that the CMP corridor keeps showing up in these reports about the provision has made me quite curious about whether it might be tested here. Now, I have to confess that I've failed to move this story in any significant way, but that's mostly because nobody seems to want to talk to me about it, including Granholm, whose office didn't even respond to my request for an interview or clarification this week. So all we know right now is that the Biden administration is interested in the CMP project, supports it, and continues to talk about seeing it through. And that also there's this provision floating around out there that might help them do that. I don't know if the federal government would use this corridors of national interest designation to see it through, but if they did, the political ramifications for taking such a step could be pretty explosive, given that it would essentially be bigfooting a popular vote against a corridor. But we also don't know if it's a consideration at all. So, well, I think we'll just have to wait and see.
I imagine at this point they can kind of afford to wait too, since there are court challenges to the vote that in the end may clear the way for the project to proceed that way.
And that's right. And to your point, Erwin, those arguments in the business court begin this week.
Maine Public's Steve Missler, joined by political reporter Kevin Miller. There's more political info in our Maine's Political Pulse newsletter available at mainepublic.org. You can also check out our podcast there. I'm Erwin Gratz, Maine Public Radio News.
And that's today's Maine News. For more stories, visit mainepublic.org. And coming up on Maine Calling at 11 o'clock Monday morning, the subject is sleep health. We'll hear from experts about common sleep disorders and get tips on healthy sleep habits. I'm Robbie Feinberg. Thanks for listening.